he's, for her function, the right person at the right place at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's weird to say that about that being Hannibal Lecter. But he's very good at what he does.
Right.
Even if his motivation isn't in the right place.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers for storytellers so that we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I'm your host, Maverick, and today we have back with us our wonderful guest, Patrick Avanto. And today we are reviewing The Silence of the Lambs, that 1991 American psychological horror thriller film, screenplayed by Ted Talley and directed by Jonathan Demme and based on The Silence of the Lambs book by Thomas Harris. So, just right off the bat, Patrick, looking at this film, what is your biggest takeaway about this film? What makes it stand out since, 3 decades ago? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I really enjoy, and one of my biggest takeaways from this particular film is, at the time, you have a lot of very standard cop narratives and murder mystery narratives and things like that, famous by like Agatha Christie and other sorts of things like that. Then Thomas Harris wrote Silence of the Lambs, which took it out of the realm of, it's interesting because it's just a cop plot, to this is horrifying and we're adding horror to it. And as my reputation on this podcast tends to be, that's 100% up my alley, so it was 100% my kind of movie. It brought into the cultural zeitgeist the now very famous Hannibal Lecter character, who in this film is played by Anthony Hopkins, and has had a few other different actors play him in various other movies.
Right.
I think ultimately just it's mostly Hannibal Lecter that was the culture-changing thing.
Yeah, I would... Well, yes, I would agree with that. There's definitely some...
There's a lot of things that this movie is affected in interesting ways, but the biggest one, and the one everyone knows about, is Dr. Hannibal Lecter.
Absolutely. Like, even if you haven't watched the film, you've heard of the character, and there is that almost aura about the character when people talk about him. So,
everyone knows him. It's like, he's clearly the main character of the movie. No.
Nope.
Not at all. In fact, just as a fun fact for the start, because if you don't know what this movie is, how? Second, right. If you do know this movie and you remember Hannibal Lecter being in it a lot, he is not. He's in the movie for, I think, collectively 15 minutes.
Interesting. Okay,
it's a powerful 15 minutes.
It is very powerful. I mean, yeah, and he still has an effect even when he's not there to a certain degree.
Oh, yeah.
But, yeah, he's definitely...
Just like on Society.
I know for myself, one of my biggest takeaways was just, this is the epitome... And this is where maybe horror movies as a genre do very well. And that is that building up the tension in the story.
Yes.
This film is very, very good at that. From my perspective, watching this for the first time, which is one of the reasons I started this podcast, was to get myself to watch these classics. And then I watched this classic, and I'm sitting there thinking, this is just a story. This is just a story. This isn't real. And that is the epitome of great writing. When you're so drawn in that you have to remind yourself as you're watching it that this is not a true story. Like, this is completely made up. And it just shows you how well they've drawn you in, engrossed you in the plot, and so much that you literally are dying to look away, and at the same time, you can't look away because you must know what happens.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
And what I enjoy, and I wholeheartedly agree with you in like, this is one of those movies that really draws you in. It's easier for this kind of movie, to draw you in because it's not ghosts, it's not demons, it's not a black and white lighthouse with a weird mermaid. It's none of that. This draws you in because there are serial killers and there are just complete whack jobs that are doing heinous things around the world.
Right.
And this is not deviating from that at all. The only fictional part is like maybe a few different aspects about the character Hannibal Lecter. not a lot of them are not real.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we'll get to that in a little bit when I want to talk more about the history of who inspired Hannibal Lecter.
Okay, I don't know if I want to hear that part. No, just kidding. Geez. All right. So
Yeah.
before we get too far into it, as always, what is the Silence of the Lambs about?
Okay. Silence of the Lambs is you said it, sort of a psychological horror thriller, uh, police procedural, air quotes, it's FBI, following a cadet recruit. She's in training. Her name is Clarice Starling. She's training for the FBI when the guru, or the head of behavioral science at the FBI, Jack Crawford, employs her to help him with hunting down a serial killer known as Buffalo Bill. But before he gets her to do that, he tries to use her to talk to the titular Dr. Hannibal Lecter, Hannibal the Cannibal, a psychiatrist who is in maximum security prison because he was found to be a psychopathic cannibal as well as a psychiatrist. And with his help, air quotes, she hunts Buffalo Bill, and that's what the movie is about.
Yep, it's a very interesting premise, but as you get involved into it, you see very quickly how especially the protagonist Clarice is compelled to be in this situation, right? And she's in some ways forced to deal with everything that's put in front of her rather than just simply desiring to talk to a cannibal about this psychological situation that they're dealing with another psychopath, right? So it's very good at providing compelling motive for people to be involved. Yeah. So based off the 9-point system, how would you rate this film? Would you say it's super high? Would you say it's a mid-tier film, low tier?
I rate this one high.
Yeah.
I rate a lot of like my favorite movies pretty high on this, but this one has a lot of history to it, literally and figuratively. And I really enjoy this movie because we'll get into that. I rate this one very high.
For sure. For myself, it also got a pretty decently high rating. I gave it a 7.95. And there was a couple points where Patrick might be able to convince me to take it higher even. So we'll see where that give and take goes, but it's almost an 8 there, which is pretty darn high for me.
Yes. Yes, it is. That's really high for you.
Yes. And I think some of that too is that, like I might have just briefly mentioned, is that horror films generally are very good at building the tension. The thing that takes me out of horror films is that people start doing things that are completely irrational. And in this case, you don't have that. Because you have people who are doing things that make very logical sense given the situation that they're in to move forward with. So
it's the whole The Thing. In The Thing, they're very logical and practical. It's just the situation that's bad. In this one, they're all very logical. And the tension comes from, you can be as logical as you want, but outside forces and other things happening that work against you.
Yeah.
And you can't control for that.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I figure you might as well just get into it. You have the main character, which is Clarice Starling, and her initial training to be in the FBI. She's a cadet, and then she gets called in by, I believe it's Jack Crawford, to have this discussion about meeting with the character of Hannibal Lecter. And from there, the plot continues to go on. So what was your initial thoughts on Clarice as the protagonist and how they continue to develop her from there?
Originally, when you are introduced to her, she kind of looks like she's running lone wolf, literally speaking. She's running alone.
Right.
She gets summoned by the guru. But the entire time, she portrays herself as very confident.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see her portraying herself as very confident.
Mm-hmm.
I'm emphasizing portraying.
Of course.
Because anyone can kind of see through something like that, at least a little bit. When you're in that situation, you play the part. When in Rome, do as the Romans do.
Right.
And she 100% plays that part very well because she's made it into the FBI. She's doing really well. She's clearly very smart. And that gets addressed when she meets Crawford.
Right. Well, yeah, and even to a certain degree, as he's explaining, her past and her credentials, and you're super qualified to be in this situation, and she almost regrettably says, "Oh, an A- instead of an A," or something like that.
Yeah.
Right.
She's a little sassy with him about his class.
Right. Exactly. So she has this idea that she's an upstart, up and coming FBI agent, and she's going to prove herself. And so, in some ways, she does embrace the situation put before her, where you are going to talk to this character Hannibal Lecter, and then it becomes very interesting, where right off the bat, he psychoanalyzes her and in some ways tears her down, right?
Yes.
And she walks away with a lot less surety than she started out with.
Yes.
And I think
then Miggs does his thing, and then he comes back and gives her a bone. Gives her a bit of the trail.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the... yeah. What was your thoughts on that initial scene? Because I think that sets the tone for the rest of their interactions.
Well, a few little interesting facts, because this is going to help fuel what I'm going to tell you.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I'll start with that, and then I'll explain my fact. Actually, that would make more sense.
Okay.
I really enjoy that intro scene because Hannibal Lecter doesn't need to do anything like verbally to control the scene.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't. His mere presence, for some reason, just feels inhuman, and that is enough to draw our attention. And Starling knows that, and she's very courteous. She does what she's been trained to do, and he goes with it up until she juxtaposes it with something that didn't fit what she was trying to do, and that was when she tried to give him the questionnaire. I really enjoy that he calls that out because it is jarringly different. You're like, okay, you're establishing rapport. Oh, a questionnaire? You seem like a perfume salesman now.
Yeah.
Fun fact about that scene is that Hannibal Lecter, played by Anthony Hopkins, Anthony Hopkins, in accepting the role, I believe he was hesitant to, because it's a bit of a dark role.
Sure. Oh, for sure.
But also, he matched his behavior to be like that of lizards and reptiles.
Interesting.
That he studied a bunch of different reptiles and snakes and lizards to just observe how they move around and how they look and their different expressions. Reptiles are very wide-eyed.
Right.
And you'd notice that Hannibal Lecter his eyes are open very wide whenever there's those uncomfortable like front shots of his face, like the really close-up shots. He's going for lizard and he puts it off well. Yeah. I'd say he puts it off well, just in retrospect, thinking back to it.
Yeah.
I enjoy the scene. There's a lot of dialogue. It's not obvious what's happening, but it's a battle for a power dynamic. And Starling is getting a feel for it, and Hannibal already has the control. Mm-hmm. I really enjoy that sequence.
Yeah, and it sets the tone for really their interactions from there, where you see how they're really dealing with. She's trying to deal with the situation, right, and trying to deal with this character that's in front of her and get information out of him, while he's more or less toying with her, and he always tries to assume a position of power. And you see that even near the end, where she starts to get desperate, moving just a little bit ahead, and he goes, like, we have different definitions of time. I have all the time in the world, right?
Yes.
You have to come to me, and you have to do what I say, because otherwise you're not getting this information. I have no reason to give it to you right now.
Exactly.
So it's very interesting how that thing from the very beginning obviously sets the tone for the rest of the story.
Yes. Another thing to look at as far as like the power dynamic, which was interesting, is when he asks to see her credentials. She holds it closer, and he just keeps telling her closer, closer.
Yeah.
Because he's getting her to do what he wants her to do.
Right.
He's already establishing that he's in control of this. If she wants to talk to him, he is in control. Right. And that's kind of a thing that happens throughout the movie, up until they just kind of start to form this odd friendship.
Yeah.
Which is I love this movie, man. I love this movie.
It's so like interesting in regards to the dynamic because there, like you said, there is some level of friendship with the cannibal that is also her enemy and is in some ways toying with her. So it's like the leech that you can't get rid of where you need him, but also you really don't want him. And as it goes on, there's some sort of empathy and rapport that develops between them, and
Yep.
there's even some indications of the meaningfulness of that later on in the story. But I think that
Yes.
it definitely starts it
And
off in a very interesting way.
and something I want to address as far as the reality of this kind of situation. This brief little history bit here. Hannibal Lecter is based off of a real serial killer. The real serial killer was neither a psychiatrist nor a cannibal, but he was is incredibly smart, and he had turned himself in. His name's Ed Kemper. If you're squeamish, don't look up the Ed Kemper case. But he was incredibly intelligent, and at a certain point, when keeping up with what the police were doing, he determined there's no way I'm going to be able to get away with it. So he got ahead of them, turned himself in, and then was one of the first few people that was spoken to because of his great intelligence about sort of the psychology behind the serial killer mind. And he more or less consulted with FBI agents and different in the beginning stages of the behavioral science units to build that up. And he helped consult on a case regarding I don't remember what the other guy's name was, another serial killer, but this other man who was not not very sane. He believed that this other guy thought that the world was going to end if he didn't kill 13 people.
Oh.
And he killed 13 people or so. And the world didn't end, more or less confirming what he thought. And he got put in a cell next to Ed Kemper. And Ed Kemper, much like Hannibal Lecter, would like punish the guy for like ill behavior and things like that.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yep. So he's based on that. And I think I wanted to address that some people, when they first watched the movie, they were like, oh, you could never talk like that to a serial killer. In fact, forensic psychologists nowadays have to have that kind of, it seems like a friendship with some of these people, to talk to them, to get info out of them, to learn about what led them to be the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
And that is 100% real as to like how weirdly friendly you have to be with some of these people that are locked away like that. So the friendship dynamic is weird. What's weirder is it's not fake. That's a real thing that happens. Didn't happen as much in 1991, but it happens more now because they gain a lot of information from that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Definitely, and one of the things you see from Hannibal Lecter in these discussions is, and this is something that I think is especially interesting in regards to creating these villains, just maybe as a side before, maybe, yeah. I don't know if it's appropriate to just dynamically talk about the villain and the hero in this case.
It's hard to with this one because they're both so intertwined.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. But in this case, you have a character who, you have a contrast especially between him and, who was the cellmate that was right next to him?
Multiple Miggs, that's right. So Miggs is insane, right? He has multiple personality disorder, I believe, and he's basically always freaking out, acting like a monkey sometimes, acting very discourteous to say the least, and other times. Yeah.
And, it's very interesting to see that contrasted with Hannibal Lecter, who's very calm, very collected, and clearly has a method of doing things. And that's what I think makes him such a terrifying villain. It's not that he has no rules. It's that he has a plethora of rules that he lives by, and he follows those to the bone. And those rules are not the same rules that everyone else lives by.
No. And I do want to address this because, I mean, it's a podcast, and sometimes this topic gets a little crunchy, we'll say. Multiple Miggs, what he suffers from is dissociative identity disorder. At least that's what they say, or that's the new terminology for it. Not everyone with that acts like multiple Miggs. Miggs has a lot of other issues. Mm-hmm. And then with Dr. Lecter, he is a psychopath But you can't. I mean, we can say what it is in the film. He's diagnosed as a psychopath. If anyone wants to debate that, it's a film.
Right.
We're not going to get any answers truly from that. So, just like with multiple MIGs, we're not going to get many answers from that because
Right.
it's a film, it's a book. I've read both. It doesn't go that deeply into that.
Right.
So, just to set the record straight there, it's what it says it is in the movie. So we're running with that.
Right. And the point is not necessarily that they have this specific diagnosis compared to that, unless that plays into how the story progresses. In this case, it builds the framework that we understand for Hannibal Lecter going forward, and it's enough to carry us.
And that stays consistent across every version of Hannibal Lecter that I've seen. And I have seen all of them now.
Nice. So you have that first interaction with Hannibal Lecter, and then from there you have... Is it from the first interaction that he makes the offer to... No. It's when he goes... He gives her a clue to go to the
storage
shed,
facility, your self-storage.
Right. And that was when she finds the head of a previous client. And from there, that's where she really gets what I would say is involved in the plot, because before that, it's more of I'm doing this for my boss to prove that I'm competent and all of this stuff.
Yes.
And then you have the real deal where she starts to get involved with Buffalo Bill, who is the psychopath at large, or the serial killer. It
should also be clarified, too. Up until that point, up until she met with Dr. Lecter, she didn't know she was working on the Buffalo Bill case.
Right.
It was actually Hannibal that revealed that. Because he basically jumped the assumption and said, okay, what Crawford really wants to hear about is Buffalo Bill. That's why he sent you to me. That's probably what this questionnaire is about.
Right.
And he didn't give her any of that up until he tells her to leave. And then Multiple Miggs does his thing. Very discourteous, which is also a very Hannibal Lecter thing. He does not like the rude.
Right.
There is a quote, I don't remember which book it's from, where he says, as much as anyone can, they should always eat the rude, or something like that.
Yeah, I had heard that too, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a Hannibal Lecter quote, or maybe from somewhere else, but I mostly hear it from Hannibal Lecter.
Right.
He reveals it and kind of soils Jack's hand that he was going to play, which was that he was going to put her on the case, and Lecter ruined that because control. Right. He will always want control over the situation.
Right.
Yeah,
and that's the impetus once she gets the head of the victim and realizes what was going on there. Then she is more or less put on this case where she needs to find out what happens with Buffalo Bill.
Yes. How does this all tie into Buffalo Bill? And clearly Hannibal knows.
Right.
But he will not give an answer.
Right. And that's really why he's able to claim this position of power, because he clearly has a relationship with the current serial killer, which is unique in and of itself that he would even have that relationship.
Yes.
But from there, he simply plays his cards however he chooses, and he chooses to make it a game.
Yes.
Where she will give him information, and then he'll give her information. But he won't give her the direct information she wants, which is, what is the name of the serial killer? No. He's going to give her information that will lead her to the serial killer. Almost proving herself to this cannibal that she's trying to get the information from.
And it's hilarious because it's not only because he's toying with her, he wants to see her grow.
Right, exactly.
He wants our character to go through her character arc.
Right.
He is the writer because he is a psychopath and he wants control.
Exactly. He's using the situation, and ironic enough, as he's trying to help her, he's also a disturbing character. So this is something I was thinking of as I was coming to this point, right? It really is, the discussions are interesting between her and Hannibal, but really when it comes down to it, when she's becomes involved in the plot, that's really of Buffalo Bill, that's really where she gets fully thrust into the situation at hand.
Yes.
And I've asked this question to you on previous podcasts for different films. What would
Yes.
you say is the A plot, and what would you say is the B plot in this film?
I'm going to loop together her conversations with Dr. Lecter and the Buffalo Bill thing as plot A. And I'm going to make plot B something very separate, and that is only Hannibal Lecter's progression towards what he does at the end of the film. And I guess from the start of this, I could put a spoiler warning now. It's been out for a long time,
Yeah,
a long enough time.
you could say that. Yeah,
His escape towards the end of the film.
Mhm.
I'd say that is plot B, because it is inconsequential to plot A. Plot A hinges upon her having those conversations with Dr. Lecter, so that has to be part of plot A.
Mhm.
So Buffalo Bill, she's not getting to Buffalo Bill without having those conversations. So those two are interconnected fully. Hannibal Lecter planning his escape, he just has that in the bag, and that's unrelated to anything regarding Clarice Starling or Buffalo Bill. In fact, that's why he only has about 15 minutes of screen time. And a few minutes of it, you don't realize are him yet.
Yeah. Well, I will say I did pick up on that very fast.
Yes.
But
Yep.
it is also, I think that whether that's intentional or not, whatever. But
Yeah.
I do think that it's definitely, that whole side plot. I wasn't even thinking of that as the B plot. I was separating the interactions between Clarice and Hannibal as its own plot line, separate.
I would have
from,
too.
I
would have
Buffalo
too.
Bill. But
I would have too, but they're too interconnected because they're dependent on each other. Buffalo Bill plot can't progress unless she has one of those conversations with Hannibal. It feels separate, but they are too dependent on each other, I think, to be separated.
To be separate.
That's just personal. You can 100% disagree. I mean, you'd be wrong, in my opinion, but, you know.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I'll have to think about that for sure.
Yeah.
My initial thought is that I disagree, but I think...
What if I offered you some Funyuns?
Please
come to
agree
the dark
with me.
side. We have Funyuns.
That's funny. Yeah, I'll dwell on that as we continue this conversation.
For sure.
But definitely, I think it's interesting. Maybe just to play out where my mind is going with this is that
Yeah, for sure.
Hannibal is a character who is his relationship to the psychopath killer that's currently out there is inconsequential to his own life
Yes.
to a certain degree. He doesn't
Oh,
care,
100%.
but he cares a lot about getting this dialogue going with this woman that is talking with him. And so
Yes.
I think that for the protagonist, because sometimes the A plot and the B plot can be interconnected a lot. So that's maybe where my mind is at, that doesn't necessarily exclude it, and maybe the C plot is the little nugget of deliciousness you get at the end. I'm just so...
Why use that terminology for this movie?
I don't know. And so
the little nugget of deliciousness with the cannibal.
Okay, I wasn't even thinking of that. Oh gosh, dude, that was the other thing too. Is the end, which we'll get to. But
Yes.
the wording was just like so precise.
Yes.
Anyways, going back to what I was just saying. The main characters. I think where I'm going with this is that you get the impression that you kind of know who the serial killer is, Buffalo Bill, already. You don't know his name, but you have a face, you have a motive, you have visual representation of what he's doing, because you see him doing it.
It doesn't shy away from showing anything that he does.
Right.
The only thing that you need to know is how is he connected, and how does Hannibal know about him?
Right.
Or not about him, how does Hannibal know him?
Right.
Dude, if you eventually get around to watching the show, the Hannibal show, at least the first 2 seasons, that explains a very interesting motivation for why Dr. Hannibal Lecter even involves himself in these situations at all. And he says it at the very start. He's curious what would happen. It's simple, but it can be quite ominous when you really think about like what that means he's doing.
Oh, 100%. And that's really, in some ways, the impetus for his involvement in here is he's just curious to see what Clarice will do.
Yeah,
And
he doesn't
so,
care about Buffalo Bill. He's not
no,
protecting Bill.
no,
He's not protecting Starling. He just wants to see what would happen. He's
yeah,
curious.
and
He wants to push a domino and see where it falls.
yeah, exactly. And when he has a situation where he feels like he has some control, then he goes, okay, let's play ball and see what happens. And
Exactly.
that's where his motivation comes in. So his whole involvement in and of itself is, like I said before, interesting. But in most, and I guess this is where my mind's coming from, right? In most mysteries, the real question is who killed this person, right? And the whole mystery is that, or who stole the jewels, or whatever the crime is, right? And your goal is to figure this out. As soon as you figure that out, the story pretty much closes itself up within a short period after that, right? The denouement and all that, blah, 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 blah.
It's why I brought up Agatha Christie earlier, is because a whodunit has the question of who, because who hasn't been revealed yet.
Right.
In this movie, you know, you're getting to already know who the killer is, what their methods, what their modus operandum is, all of that.
Right.
You just don't know how it's linked, and all you're seeing is this escalating time bomb of things getting worse from this one guy, and this other guy who's arguably worse, toying with the only character that's figuring out how to deal with things.
Right, exactly. And so that's where it's very unique in regards to the whodunit aspect. And so
it almost treats it like a monster movie. Because, like, a monster movie, you know there's a monster, you know what the monster is, kind of, and you kind of see what the monster does, but you don't know what the monster is, and that's really, or how it came to be. And they treat it like that. Right. And I think that's a really good way to handle a movie like this, because, I mean, in one sense, Buffalo Bill is a monster.
Oh, 100%. He is a monster. There's no doubt that guy.
He's not a literal monster. He's a figurative monster. Okay, just like Dr. Lecter.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, dude, you're just throwing me off. You threw off my groove. That was actually good. I think my point with that was that the whodunit is so different that there's almost a sense in which you get the conclusion is almost to a certain degree, not even partially, I guess, that connection of, okay, how are they connected? And then also, will Clarice find out who it is?
Yes.
But her actually, usually in a situation like this, I guess the capturing of the person happens soon after, or it's inconsequential, or it's part of the B plot. And maybe that's where my mind's going at. Is like the actual capturing of Buffalo Bill, the killer, is more of the subplot that's still engaging and intriguing, but it's somewhat separate from the mystery of this film, which is more of what I would think the main plot is.
And you could break this down into so many different mysteries too. Like, you know, you've got the classic, the murder mystery thing. Well, clearly he's a murderer. We got to know who he is. Let's go catch him. But then you also have more of the implied mystery of what the heck is Hannibal planning?
Right.
What's he doing? Why is he doing this? Why is he helping? Why is he helping Clarice?
Right.
And all of that. What's happening from Clarice's past? What happened there?
Right.
All of that fun stuff. And it's all of these that all contribute. So maybe I'll amend what I said. I don't want to separate the two, but I think what I would say is that our main plot has a few different disjointed but connected dependencies. So I would say that our main plot technically consists of, I'm going to say, 3 things. Because we track Buffalo Bill, he captures a senator's daughter, and his progressing things with that, including a very snazzy dance, and then Clarice hunting Buffalo Bill, and Clarice having to utilize talking with Dr. Lecter and have their conversations. I'm going to group those up as A1, A2, and A3, and then B plot being Hannibal Lecter escaping. Because Hannibal Lecter escaping has nothing to do with any of those at all. It's just him seizing opportunities and getting away from the thing.
Right.
That's how I'd put it.
Okay, gotcha. I thought you were going to go into those in depth right
so
now.
We're going to go... No.
Okay. Yeah. No, I definitely see that. I think, and this is, I don't want to. Maybe it's just appropriate to go back now and then, or like go forward now for me, and then explain where I'm coming from, and then go back in time to. So this is going to be a little disjointed compared to maybe a normal flow of the podcast, but where I'm coming from in regards to this is that usually when you get to a denouement like that, where the revelation is already revealed in my mind, right? And you have the, okay, now we know how they're connected and it all makes sense, right? Or even the mystery of Clarice now knows where the killer is, roughly, right? And
Yep.
she's going to go there and find them, right? There's, those, once those mysteries are resolved, you would think, okay, now it's just catching the bad guy and whatever. But there's even, I think the B plot in this is so compelling regardless of already knowing that information.
Oh, for sure.
And you can even have some confidence that, okay, now the FBI, even if she wasn't there, would have enough information to go and capture Buffalo Bill without her being there, right?
I mean, she's clearly too far away.
Right. So then the question is like, why do you still have your heart jumping in your throat when
why is there still runtime on this movie?
Right. Exactly. When she's like walking into the house, talking with him, and part of that is, I think, something that, and I've just been trying to think about this for so much. Maybe I'm getting it a little convoluted, but let me just say my piece.
Keep cooking.
In this situation, you become so emotionally tied to the protagonist because of knowing her backstory and her motivations and her aspirations and her fears and everything that's been explained throughout the story, which we'll get to the lambs in a second, I'm sure. But that when you come into conflict with the villain, or the B-plot villain, I would call Buffalo Bill, you desperately want her to live. And so even though you know the end is nigh for Buffalo Bill, you know he will be caught, there's no doubt, you still don't want him to kill Clarice because you have such an emotional investment in her as a character. And I think that's, one, a compelling aspect of good storytelling, but two, also explains why you can be so emotionally tied to characters in other stories that maybe aren't the primary plot characters either.
Yeah.
So that's where you have things such as in notoriously probably Game of Thrones, where it is filled with characters that you are not the primary characters, but at the same time they've been built up and you've learned to care about them.
You get to know them well enough. Yeah.
Right. And you want to see them survive, or they have a lot of potential. Or you have Robb Stark, who's building a vast army and has a grand future ahead of him to come into conflict with the enemy. And right at the peak of their potential, bam, they get cut out, right? Yeah. And that's the kind of thing you don't want to see because it just eats at you. So that's what you have in this, is like that potentially being wasted if Buffalo Bill kills her.
I taught a character writing class once.
Yeah.
And it was to a bunch of high schoolers that I was tired of seeing tired of seeing write stories with just bland characters that were there as cannon fodder.
Yeah.
So I made a game out of it. I taught this class by saying, all right, we're going to write a story. Each of you is going to write a story. You have 3 minutes to write as much as you can, introduce a character, and name them.
Right.
And then what I did was I had a piece of paper with 10 different things about the character that they will need to add. And I had them introduce it at random. Mm-hmm. And I had the 10th one as not random because I'm a jerk. And I basically had them give a bit of backstory for the character, in some way determine like what the character's goal is, give the character something to want to achieve, really.
Yeah.
Give the character a motivation. Have the character have internal dialogue. Who's the character related to? Bring that up. Right. Things like that. And then, number 10, at the end, I said, all right, now kill your character.
Yeah.
And the collective, what? Was fantastic.
Yeah.
Because I made them make a character that they actually put more thought and effort into. I gave them a little bit of growth. Mm-hmm. And then I decided to just test to see how well they liked their character.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
half of them killed their character. The others didn't.
Because
they refused. They were weak.
That's
But
hilarious.
I mean, like Hannibal in this sense, in this movie, Hannibal forces Clarice to open herself up so much that the audience is able to also utilize that and empathize with her and really relate to her.
Mhm.
But Hannibal's only reason for doing that is because he just wants to see if he can tear her down.
Exactly. Yeah.
But then to make her grow too.
Yeah.
He
So
does that.
that's
He does that.
it is an interesting situation. So I
Yes.
mean, what, especially when you're talking about these two, because their dynamic is critical to the whole story.
Yes.
What do you think that Clarice gets out of this relationship, especially in light of, maybe it's appropriate to talk about the lamb situation, which is exactly the what may I just say, a brilliant naming of a story.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
you hear that and you go, what does the silence
How
of
does
the
this
lambs...
relate to lambs? And why is it a death's head moth on the cover and not a lamb?
Yeah, exactly. Literal thoughts I've thought as I looked at the poster.
Yeah. Yep. But it's brilliant how they tie in what the lambs actually represent.
Mm-hmm.
And I 100% believe that learning that is critical to the plot.
100%.
I also think it's hilarious, just as a side note, that we never hear the words "the silence of the lambs" technically at all, ever in the movie. There's a variation of it, but never the actual
or something
thing.
like that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Exactly. So, for you who have not watched the film but are still listening, why exactly I'm not sure, but you have this situation where...
Go watch the film.
Yeah, exactly.
Now continue.
Where Hannibal Lecter is talking with her and he's trying to get her to reveal her backstory, right? Her father died when she was young. Her mother died before that. She goes off to see her uncle and his wife and stays with them for 2 months before she hears the bleating of the lambs in the house out back, where they're now slaughtering the lambs for food, right?
Yep.
And she's traumatized by this and wants to save them, right, as a little child that she is. So she goes and she helps one escape. And they only get a couple miles because it's a big lamb.
It's freezing, it's cold, the lamb is big, it's heavy.
Right.
And her uncle finds her and brings her back, punishes her briefly. It doesn't really go into any details about that even in the book, but it's clear it's not a bad type of punishment or anything like that.
Right.
And then the lamb gets slaughtered.
Right. She's not able to save the lamb, and then she ends up off at a orphanage or some sort because the uncle is frustrated. And from there, she's had this impression that perhaps saving these lives in some degree or another is her own version of saving the lamb in
her own propitiation.
Yes, exactly. Her way to redeem herself. And these nightmares she's been having about the lambs bleeding, and she wants to have silence in her dreams, no longer hearing the lambs.
Yep.
What I think that really opens up the plot and her motivation in the plot from there.
And you ask this, why does talking to Hannibal help?
Mm-hmm.
Because Hannibal's a psychiatrist. Sorry, that's it.
I was not expecting that. That's hilarious. Yeah, I mean, I guess. I suppose.
I guess.
Yeah, so.
But he doesn't. One, I guess there's just a funny thing about the function of Hannibal Lecter in this is he's a psychiatrist and he has all the techniques and things to psychoanalyze and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But he's in prison. And he has no issue breaking any of the standard rules that psychologists and psychiatrists are under when it comes to like therapizing people. Mm-hmm. So he just has fun with it, and ultimately, I think at a certain point, Clarice understands that it sucks that it has to be him that she's talking to,
mm-hmm.
but he's the one that knows the right questions to ask her.
Right.
And by happenstance, to break down those barriers. And by happenstance, she got put on this case to talk with him, and he sees those vulnerabilities. He sees an air of confidence, but he doesn't see that there. He sees instead fears. He sees
Right.
somebody who's nervous, somebody who very frequently doesn't get a lot of sleep because of those nightmares that she's having. And he's, for her function, the right person at the right place at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's weird to say that about that being Hannibal Lecter. But he's very good at what he does.
Right.
Even if his motivation isn't in the right place.
Right. Yeah. So what, especially in regards to their relationship, right? To a certain degree, she feels an appreciation for him forcing her to grow through this experience and learning more about herself and facing her fears rather than always shoving them down in her psyche.
Yes.
What are your thoughts about that relationship post capturing or stopping Buffalo Bill? I mean, she's got a positive relationship with an evil man.
Yes. Yep. What do I think about that? When guarded, that's normal. When not, you ever heard of Stockholm Syndrome?
Yeah.
That's something that could happen. However,
go ahead.
It doesn't in this situation, but
Mm-hmm.
Especially with him escaping and everything.
Right.
For her, the outcome is overall positive based on what happens at the end. She graduates and she actually has like confidence. She's conquered her fears and things like that. And she also did a heroic act and put away a very terrible person.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then Hannibal calls her and congratulates her, which is like, okay, weird.
Right. Right.
Then he goes and has a friend for dinner. So
yeah, exactly. That was what I mentioned earlier. That was the psyche. That was the crazy thing where he goes, "All right, I'm
having a friend for dinner,"
and it's like, okay, he's a cannibal, so he's literally going to planning on eating them, and that's the crazy, ominous ending that you're thinking of, where oh, it's so nice. She grows as a person. She gets congratulated and gets promoted into an official part of the FBI and gets congratulations from her boss, the Jack Crawford.
Yeah.
And then she gets a call, and you have the ominous ending that Hannibal Lecter is still out there and he is going off to kill more people, right? And it's
very funny too because it's written off in the next movie in sequence. Because by the way, it's the Silence of the Lambs trilogy is a trilogy. There's 3 books. Mm-hmm. Silence of the Lambs was the first one to come out, I believe, in film, but it was written originally. Red Dragon, which was the second film made, which is right before Silence of the Lambs. Mm-hmm. That's what deals with Hannibal Lecter getting caught. Then there's Silence of the Lambs, and then there's one simply called Hannibal. Hannibal, that's made way later, I think early 2000s.
Yeah.
And they just completely write off in a hilarious way that Dr. Chilton, the friend he had for dinner, disappeared in the Bahamas. And that's it. He just disappeared in the Bahamas.
That's hilarious.
He left and then disappeared, and that was it. And I was just like, oh, that's funny. Also, Dr. Chilton is a character. He's the owner of the director of the institution that Hannibal Lecter is housed in. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Chilton sucks. Dr. Chilton sucks. He's just an awful character. He's not badly written. He's just he just sucks.
Right. Well, you
clinically.
See that he's clinically he's an ally in some ways to Clarice because he gives her access to the institution and things like that. But he clearly has his own motives, and you get some indication that his career has stagnated and he's not really satisfied with where he's at, and he wants an opportunity to at least make progress. And so his opportunity comes when he goes, okay, I will get Hannibal Lecter out of here in exchange for getting the name of the person that we're looking for. And when I do that, I will get the accolades I've been looking for this entire time.
So Dr. Chilton...
get to go on a vacation to the Bahamas.
Dr. Chilton's motivations aren't for progress, technically speaking. We could make it more specific. Dr. Chilton wants to be famous.
Right. Oh, yeah, because he says his name. Yeah.
That's it. He only just wants to be famous.
Yep.
And it's hilarious because he gets written off in the last movie.
Yeah. He goes, that is clever. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
because he won't say the killer's name that they have revealed to them by Hannibal Lecter, but he will spell out his name very explicitly to the newspapers that are
Yes.
recording his interview. So yeah, he's an interesting character. He doesn't have a ton of influence on the plot other than to push it forward in regards to Hannibal Lecter moving his location,
And
which leads to his
escaping.
eventual escape. Right.
Yes.
What were your thoughts on Jack Crawford as the head of the psychology unit in the FBI?
I enjoy this version of Jack Crawford, but I don't see enough of him in it. I like his part. He kind of is like a fatherly character when he's there.
Mm-hmm.
And he maintains staying like that the whole time. A mentor, a guru, as they actually refer to him as in the movie. They call him the guru. I very much like his protective nature. He didn't want Clarice to know that she was working on the Buffalo Bill case when she first talked to Hannibal Lecter, because it's basically a double-blind experiment, is what it was. So neither the subject nor neither the tester or the subject should know what the topic is.
Right.
That kind of thing. Makes sense. That keeps them both safer. But Hannibal's too clever for that. I like his character. I like how he supports. I just wish I had seen more of him.
Interesting.
That's one of a few things about the movie.
Sure, yeah. I have no reference point for any other of the types of Jack Crawford, so I can't speak to more experience with him other than I will agree that
I'm going to reference and recommend that you watch the show, not to even to review it, but just go through the show, at least the first 2 seasons.
Of
Hannibal.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
It builds all of these characters in a way more than Silence of the Lambs could ever have.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so good.
Right.
It's so good. But Silence of the Lambs, I'm not poo-pooing it. It's still a fantastic movie.
Right.
Jack Crawford is fantastic in it.
Right.
I just wish I would have seen more of him, so. Yeah. That's also coming from reading the book.
Sure. And I will say, even from my own experience, purely being this one film, Jack Crawford and the other side characters, I would say, was a little light in regards to the development of the plot. They definitely could have had more of them, and it would have been great. But I didn't. I think that he was as one of the main side characters. Jack Crawford was not a detriment to the film. He definitely was an addition.
Exactly.
And some of the things that I think were interesting in his involvement was, like you said, the fatherly figure, but he's still nuanced in his own ways, right? Yes. He has some level of misogynistic tendencies, and he's not. And purposefully,
which is a big thing about this movie too, is it addresses like misogyny in these systems as it existed back then. It still does, but it's slowly being diminished. But that's a whole other thing about this movie is Clarice isn't even a full agent,
right?
And she's stepping on the toes of a bunch of people, like when they're looking at the body, when they're going to investigate the body, and she asks all the men to leave because they're just crowding the funeral home or whatever.
Right.
Blatantly, that I think was the most like on the nose point at which the misogyny was really addressed.
Right.
But it wasn't handled. Yeah, it wasn't like, to me, even though there were some conversations about it like that seemed a lot more like it was misogynistic. When Crawford explains later why, it kind of dulls it only a tiny bit in a way that doesn't hurt the point. But kind of explains that maybe that wasn't the best method or whatever, however you want to deal with it.
Right.
But there's nuance to it all. And that's a big thing about this movie, is dealing with misogyny.
Right. And the chief of the FBI admits that, where he's like, hey, I wasn't trying to be rude there or anything like that, or try to step on your toes, just blah, 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 and more or less apologizes to her for that whole situation. Yes. And so, he's a nuanced character. He's really trying to be caring. And he was great. I also thought it was interesting that the dynamic when Hannibal Lecter brings up, oh, well, is he interested in you? Basically, does he want to have sex with you? And she do you
fantasize about Jack Crawford sexually?
Right.
Which is the most clinical way of asking that, so it kind of detaches some of the painfulness of being asked such a thing. But again, that's another point of like, are you only doing this because that?
Right. And she says, no, that's not a part of this relationship at all. And so it almost poses that question right at the beginning, like, what is the relationship here? And they affirm it really well at the end, where they stick out their hands and shake, and show that, like, even though there is clearly some, like, professional caring, may I just say, in the relationship, it is professional. They're not in any way romantically interested in each other, and that is
it's
the
professional
appropriate
and
relationship.
mentor, fatherly. He's fatherly to everyone, kind of.
Right.
But he draws his line, and he's very good at drawing his lines.
Right.
And so is Clarice.
Right.
And I like that happens in this movie because, like, clearly some movies would be like, put a sex scene there.
Right, exactly.
And then we're like,
yeah.
This
Why?
contributed nothing and just made it worse. Thank you.
Exactly.
But this one didn't do that, and it knew not to do that because that's not what it goes for, because it's actually well written.
Yep. That's exactly right. And so it was almost like a not struggle, but like obstacle for Clarice to overcome by introducing questions that almost like Hannibal was trying to influence her in a negative way, and she refuses to let that happen. And so it was just one of those things that as a side character they introduced, and they really played out well in the film. And it's just a small thing, but it was done excellently.
The something I do want to address, because I feel like it could 100% get ignored, is the cover of Silence of the Lambs typically has a reference to a moth with a skull on it, which is a real moth. I believe it's Japanese. It's referred to as the Death's Head moth. And the only reason it's important to the plot as far as the film is it's a piece of evidence found in one of the victims that they are doing an autopsy on. It is a pod, I'm trying to remember, the cocoon for the moth is found in the throat of one of the victims of Buffalo Bill. Mm-hmm. And it has a death's head moth in it, and that's a piece of evidence that they're eventually able to tie to Buffalo Bill to definitely ensure and use that as something that narrows down where the info came from, where the moth came from, and how to track him.
Right. Yeah.
That's how that's important. I figured if we talk about the lambs, we should talk about the moth.
Right. And it becomes a critical piece for Clarice to identify Buffalo Bill when she is asking for information at his house.
Yes.
So it was definitely another excellent point in the film. Everything is done super well.
It is. There's only one thing plot-wise that I felt like could have been explored more, but also the movie is about 2 hours long, so I understand why they didn't. And that is, it didn't show the FBI coming to the conclusion and heading over to his house that they thought they were going to. She calls Crawford, and he just says, "We found this, did this, this, and this, and so we're heading on his way. You don't have to do anything now." Uh-huh. And that was how they ended up going to the wrong place.
Right, exactly. Which they play off well.
Yeah, they play that well.
Because it looks like they're going to the right house, and then turns out the person ringing the doorbell was not the FBI, it was Clarice.
It was Clarice.
Yeah.
Yep. I love that. So, let's talk about Jame Gumb.
Yes, please.
What do you think of Jame Gumb, Buffalo Bill?
I mean,
Jame Gumb is a very controversial character nowadays.
The whole premise of him is terrifying. I think there's a lot of like very disturbing things about him as a villain, right? Clearly he's got mental problems, and that's what Hannibal explains, is that he's got violent tendencies in addition to transvestite interests. So
I also want to clarify this here at the start before we even touch on that particular aspect of Jame Gumb. He had been through, because there's a whole plot point of he, for a time, felt like he should believe he's a woman. And I phrase that very, very specifically. Mm-hmm. Because he doesn't qualify as a transsexual or a transvestite because he didn't actually believe or feel that he was. So a lot of the controversy comes from like, oh, this is misrepresenting that. No, this is actually something different. And they say that in the film because he had been evaluated for that kind of stuff by Dr. Lecter, who wasn't really like one side or the other as far as that particular issue, but instead he said that this man does not qualify for that. There's something else up with him. It isn't transvestism or anything. It isn't exactly gender dysphoria. Mm-hmm. It was something else.
Right. Yeah, and that's really what you have. And I guess maybe I'm not sure exactly what that is that was maybe psychologically wrong with him.
Just like with Dr. Lecter, just like with multiple MIGs, it doesn't dig into it
Okay,
because it doesn't need to.
right? Because you
But it should 100% be said that not everyone that suffers from those issues behaves like that.
right, exactly. Yeah,
I actually know a psychopath. I do. He's not the most pleasant person to be around,
uh
but he's not Hannibal Lecter.
right,
I know a person with DID, dissociative identity disorder. They
Mhm.
definitely aren't doing what Miggs was doing.
right, exactly.
And
Yeah,
same thing goes for I know somebody who actually has gender dysphoria and other things like that. They're not. This isn't a movie that says all people that suffer from these potential things act like this.
right,
So I just want to make sure it clarifies that.
right, and that's it. This is showing the lowest of the low type
The lowest of the
situation.
low, the vocal minority, as I like to call it.
Right, right. No, I mean the creepiest thing about Mr. Gumb is that he's I think his fetish with making a human skin body.
A woman's suit out of
Yeah,
human skin. Yep.
yeah. That was probably of all things the thing that most is disturbing about him, and the fact that they dwell on that so often. And he's his clear dysphoria manifesting itself when he's dancing in in front of
Yes.
the camera and
Equally
pretending
strange
that
to read
he's
that
not
part.
a man. Yeah, it was very, very. I think that, like, in regards to creating a compelling psychopath type character, is very interesting. I also
Yes.
think that he provides a opposite mirror type
Yes.
comparison to Hannibal Lecter as a villain, right? Where one is very well, they're both cool, like calculated, right? But one is more
One is more sociable and the other is a little more deranged.
right, exactly.
Also,
And
props to actor Ted Levine for playing Buffalo Bill so well.
yeah, oh,
He
100%.
is fantastic.
Yeah, yeah, it was very impressive in a disturbing way.
Yes. Can you imagine reading the script for that and reading that one part with the dance and being like, I'm
Yeah, he's
okay
just
with this?
like, all right, here we go.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this, especially the story in regards to like themes and
Mhm.
messages that it's trying to convey?
I think it does, like, when it addresses um, kind of the character growth of um, Clarice Starling, I think it
Mhm.
represents character growth very well. I think it represents conquering your fears, conquering your past.
Mhm.
It does that very, very well
Mhm.
because it plays consistent with that. In regards to like addressing misogyny in large organizations like the FBI and things like that, I think it also does that very well. It doesn't feel heavy-handed.
Mhm.
The point that I brought up earlier where I said the most heavy-handed was not heavy-handed. It was like,
No.
look, be respectful. There's a murder, blah blah blah. We have to do the autopsy. Stop treating this like a cafe.
Right. Right.
It did that pretty well. Crawford dealing with that very well as well was very good.
Right.
Um, Other themes I would include kind of like I liked that it didn't ever specify truly exactly the details of any diagnoses across all of the different more uh, villainous characters.
Mhm.
Because I think the moment you do that, you open yourself up to a kind of criticism you don't want to deal with. You'll get the same
Sure.
criticism you got with Split, the M. Night Shyamalan film.
Oh, okay. I haven't
Um,
seen that one. But every M Night Shyamalan has always been a trip. I'll tell you that.
yeah. I like the movie. I definitely do understand a lot of the critiques about it, but the whole idea is that when you start throwing in very specific definitions and very clearly supposing like you're alluding to specific mental disorders,
Mhm.
people tend to have the idea that, and I don't fault them for this, but they'll think that, well, you're misrepresenting this. It's like, I get that. We're talking about a single case, which is a minority case of a person like this behaving in a way that is deviant.
Right.
Which, I mean, if I had a disorder and I was frequently misspoken about and things like that or whatever, I wouldn't want to be misrepresented. So I get it.
Mhm.
I think they played their cards well with this in not being as specific as they could.
Right.
So they
Right. Right.
handled
Right.
that very well, as in my opinion.
Yeah.
Trying to think of other themes. Cannibalism, it's kind of sexy now. Anyways.
Oh gosh. Oh gosh. Um, well, that's all we have for tonight.
Yeah, I think we're gonna head out. I gotta grab my Hannibal cookbook.
Jeez, oh my gosh, dude. That's wild.
I had to throw that in there. It's a joke. It's a joke. I'm not a cannibal, guys. Despite what you may hear.
Do not do another podcast with Patrick.
He keeps recommending weird movies and makes these cannibal jokes. It's really, I just don't know why.
Yeah. I think one thing that they bring up regularly in this film, which I thought was interesting, was the idea of coveting. And that was a very strong theme of what do you covet? How do you covet? Oh, you covet what's before your eyes. You don't go out to covet things. You just see something and desire it. And that ends up becoming a critical, not just a critical message or idea in the story, but it becomes critical to her understanding where to even look for the villain, right? And that becomes one of the big revelations for her, is combining this single idea, right? You covet what's in front of your eyes to, oh, the first person that was killed was the only one that was weighed down, and that's why they were found as the third body rather than the first. Right?
Yes.
And that becomes the, okay, that was actually likely where he's more central to. Goes there, ends up finding the clues she needs to find the killer. So, very well integrated into the storyline because of how they both see the idea and make it a regular theme of what does it mean to covet, who is coveting, and like the evils of coveting and how it manifests itself in the worst ways possible. I just
like that they even use the word covet.
Yes.
Nobody uses that in like modern like literature at all.
I want that.
They'll just say, I want that, or he wanted that.
Right.
He covets.
Yes.
That makes it also have like a bit more of a graveness to it.
Right.
Because it like almost brings it down to like 7 Deadly Sins levels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Speaking of that, did you watch 7 yet or no? We're going to review that one.
Okay, all right, here we go. Give me like a month and then I'll be ready for it.
Yeah, no, definitely. That one's... Yeah. Anyways.
Nice. Yeah, so there's some good themes. I think... I'm not sure how strong the message is, other than like maybe don't covet, or like coveting can lead to very bad things. But you know, it is a strong theme for sure.
It's a theme. I wouldn't say there's a message about it yet.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say that like you could loosely say there's one, because most of the time coveting is brought up. It's not in good light,
right?
But
100%.
It doesn't quite like say anything about him coveting, or like there's no retribution that involves specifying that it's because of the covetousness.
Right.
It's one of those things where it's like, oh, this character is flawed because he covets.
Right.
And that's one of many puzzle pieces that contributes to this character's downfall.
Right.
But it's not coveting alone. It's coveting in action.
Yes. Sorry, that took me a second to think through. 100%. Cool. So, obviously, this movie has stuck around for a while, right? It came out in 1991, and it's still being talked about in 2024. What are your thoughts on the impact of this film and what it means for maybe society today? Or
massive impact. I meant it as a joke about cannibalism being sexy.
100%.
The problem is, when Hannibal the show came out, cannibalism in a joking way also did actually become a little sexy.
Interesting.
Trust me, watch the first episode, you'll understand why I like it. I think this movie has had a massive impact because it won't die. And there's no way it can, because it is relevant still. There are things in it that are still 100% relevant. So long as there are people probing the depths of inhumanity, then this is going to be relevant in some way, because that's what this is about. This is about dealing with the worst of the worst kinds of people.
Right.
And coming out of it without getting a little poop on your shoe. Or even if you do, cleaning it off and coming out of it better in some way. That's another thing I like about this movie. And clearly, the cultural impact is massive. Everyone knows about Dr. Hannibal Lecter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Everybody knows about him.
Yeah.
Even though he's not arguably, he's the main villain of the whole series.
Uh-huh.
But Buffalo Bill is the main villain of the cop plot to this movie.
Right.
We all know Buffalo Bill. If you've watched the movie, you'll never forget Buffalo Bill, but everyone knows Hannibal Lecter even if you haven't seen the movie.
Right. Exactly.
And that, I think, is a good sign for it.
Oh, yeah, 100%. It definitely is going to be continuing. There's a reason that it's still talked about. It will be talked about. And as disturbing as the plot is, in my opinion, it's still going to stick around for a reason. Do I think it's an amazing film with an amazing storyline and a gripping plot? 100%.
Yeah.
Do I see myself watching this regularly? Probably not, but...
Weak! Weakness!
Oh, gosh. Oh, man. It is an incredible film. There's a lot to be said about the plot, and there are reasons for that. So, yeah.
We didn't even touch on everything. We touched on points that we thought were big, but there's so much in this movie. It's so good.
Go ahead and watch it again.
Watch it. I'll watch it again. I'll watch it tonight. Watch me.
You're like, we're having a watch party right after this.
Yeah, we're watching this right now.
Nice. And, I guess that is it. That is the pod. We hope you all enjoyed. As always, if you're watching, please give us a subscribe or a like or whatever it is that it takes. Leave us a review on the podcast app. We really appreciate it. That's it. We'll be back, as we always are. See ya next
Bye, everyone.
week.
2 things. If he gets more success, he has to watch more messed up movies. That's one thing. The second thing is, there actually is a Hannibal cookbook based on the show.
Oh my gosh.
Just so you know.
Oh
and I
my
definitely
gosh.
don't have it on my bookshelf. All right. Yeah, that'll be the final words of this podcast.
All right, that's it. We're out.